Hello and welcome back to the channel. Thank you for joining me in another of my amazing interviews. History is a fascinating thing. On my shelf downstairs in my front room, I've got loads of books on history and they all tell me what had happened. We've recently been living through a period, have we not, gentle viewer, in which some of the history of the world that we know is turning itself upside down. One of the things, however, that we know to be true, of course, is that in 1215 at Runnymede, the Magna Carta was signed by the barons and King John to hold him to account. We know that's true, don't we? Do we? Because I've been reading some books which are about to be released here called the Magna Carta Fraud, which puts all of this into question. The author is Joseph Gregory Hallett, and otherwise we're going to call him Greg, who also claims to be King John III and Britain's greatest historian. He joins me now. Greg, welcome to the show.
Thanks for the intro. I'll try and live up to it.
Please do. Now, you sent me very kindly your books, and there's 13 in the series.
Yeah.
And in this series, you're making some very large claims which will surprise a lot of people and put noses out of joint of many others, I would imagine. Can I just read to you the first paragraph on the back of the version that you've got, which I know is a proof copy, so it may not be the final version that ends up on the back of this. This is, by the way, book 7. And it says, King John did not make a dash across the Wash, but took 9 days to travel around, and was poisoned approaching Newark Castle. Resting inside, he was executed in the most horrific fashion. Then his 6 crowns and regalia was stolen, taken to Rome. To cover this murder theft, Catholic chroniclers destroyed King John's reputation, but King John never saw the Magna Carta in his lifetime. So these are massive claims, and I know that you have been ridiculed by many people, but I'm not here to ridicule or challenge you on that, but to find out really how this comes about, and we'll find out more about you and of course your claim to being King John III, if that's okay.
Yeah, well, those are two quite big topics, and they're related.
Right. So let's...
Yes, so I was signed in as King John III on the 9th of July 2020, and I was presented with the sword of the Duke of Saxon, Coburg and Gotha, and I was given a letter from Queen Victoria awarding kingship.
So when you say you were given a letter from Queen Victoria, my knowledge of Queen Victoria is quite limited, but I do think that she's dead. So I'm not quite sure how did she...
Passed down the lineage. It's passed down the lineage through the royal male primogeniture.
Ah, right. Okay, that makes more sense. I was just thinking, hand from the grave writing would be a bit odd. Well, let's just take that bit for read for the moment,
Yeah,
if you don't mind, Your Majesty. I'll call you Greg. So this Magna Carta, then, what made you start to think and explore the idea that this might be a fraud?
I read history, I've read history, by myself, not at a university, for
Right.
about the last 20 years, and none of it stacked up. Just not one bit. You always get to a dead end, and then it's just a nothing, and that's the end of the lie broadcasting itself, and we've got nothing beyond. It's just a cliff and a void and nothing. So I looked at the Magna Carta, and then I realized that it was built on a flood. It was supposedly signed and supposedly sealed on a floodplain, and there's actually a cartoon of an obelisk on Runnymede, a proposed obelisk, and the joke was you couldn't build an obelisk on a floodplain. So Runnymede was a floodplain, right? And it was it's right next to the Hythe End Spring, which is the most powerful spring in southern England. But I've researched the springs, and the power of the springs in the UK is hidden, and it's probably the most powerful spring in the United Kingdom, right? And it gushes out 134 cubic meters of water every day.
Wow.
It is half a mile by half a mile by 6 foot deep every day. right? So Runnymede, in the ancient maps, it's got a square of rivers around it and then rivers going through it as well. So it's marshy and bog. And then I went to the site and it has reeds growing in it, right? And the Thames has been channeled away from Runnymede now, and there's a flood bank road that you drive on, and then there's Runnymede below. So the Thames is actually higher than the Runnymede that you stand on. And then I went to the Runnymede celebrations on 15th of June 2015, 800-year celebrations. And I went there before to watch the preparations, and they had to put metal down because the judges were sitting on the chairs and sinking into the ground.
Gosh, right.
So the whole thing was just a giant fraud, and they only started to put they built these huge lakes. When you drive into Heathrow, you see all these water bodies, massive water bodies. All of those are man-made, and they're all earth banks, which are between 8 and 20 meters high. And all of the water is pumped out of the Hythe End Spring and Runnymede into these massive 5 or 6, now 7 or 8 reservoirs.
Right.
Feed all of that southwest London.
And I suppose if you just take the name Runnymede, it sort of does give the game away a little bit there, that it's a meadow that is full of running water.
Brackish water, slow running brackish water.
Right.
And Runnymede, just to clarify, Runnymede is just about 3 miles south of Windsor Castle.
Right, okay.
So it's very close to Windsor Castle.
Yeah.
Another thing to do with the kingship is I sent 25 major documents, which are about, let's say, that thick. They're 60 to 200 pages thick, right?
Right.
To the Queen and Prince Charles and Prince Philip, the royal family, the Prime Minister, President of America, President of Russia, Prime Minister of Israel, Archbishop of Canterbury. And I sent these documents, and one of them I sent to Queen Elizabeth II, and I said, if you think Runnymede is a fraud, go to Runnymede on the 31st of March 2021. And she did. And she was breaking her 5.5-month lockdown. So going from Windsor Castle to Runnymede is just 3 miles. She broke her 5.5-month lockdown, went to Runnymede, and got the Australasian red arrows to fly over to acknowledge that Runnymede was a fraud. And she also sold her copy of the Magna Carta around 2012. She realized it was a fraud.
Wow.
Yeah.
That seems very strange that she would have done that.
Well, as part of acknowledging me as real, in that instance, she acknowledged me as real.
Okay, so let's just talk a little bit more about the Runnymede, because if you go back in time to 1215, when it is supposed to have been signed,
yeah,
and you're saying, it's a massive bog, and of course back then it would have been far worse. We know how even in Sussex, the rivers down here were much wider. Where I am, a number of villages that are now sort of completely dry, and there's a smallish river maybe a couple of miles nearby. These were great big ports, very busy places. So we don't
swamps.
sort of have...
They were swamps.
They were swamps,
and
exactly.
We were actually neighbours. We were actually neighbours for a bit back in 2015.
But going back to 12, as you say, 1215,
yeah.
lots of bodies of water, lots more swamps. People, you're saying that people couldn't get to Runnymede. I mean, why would you choose that if you're signing a very important document with the king? Why would you stand in a swamp field and you call it the area of dead horses?
Yeah, a field of dead horses. Because if the horses went in there, they would get stuck. And it's really hard to pull a horse out unless you've got a tractor and a lever arm and a harness.
Yeah.
So Runnymede was a field of dead horses if they went to sign there.
Yes. So could they have signed somewhere else? I mean, your claim, of course, is not just on the fact that the location is swampy, or that's a big thing. They could have signed it, several miles away and just said, for the sake of argument, we'll pretend we signed it there. But I think that you are even saying that the document itself does not exist, but copies of, or what should we say? They're not copies of. They're what? Sorry.
Exemplifications.
So examples of something that was never there. is what we have in the museums and kept under lock and key and preserved.
Certified as real by the original fraudsters.
Right. So how do you, I mean, what makes you state this? Because a lot of historians will say, go to the original sources, and that's...
I did. They weren't
right.
there. They simply weren't there. Just going back to the Runnymede site, now that they've pumped out the high Van Spring up into these great reservoirs, and they had the really hot summer of 1976, as soon as they'd finished the last reservoir, to dry out Runnymede.
Right.
What that long, hot summer was about, because we've got geoengineering, right? So there are no originals of the Magna Carta. They admit that. Like the National Archives admit it, the British Museum admits it, the British Library admits it. And I've written to the specialists on the Magna Carta, right? And I've asked them all the questions. Where is it? And they say, go to this site, go to that site, look around here. Oh, it's not there. It's just another reference to another copy of a draft of an exemplification of a made up. It's actually not there.
So what's in what is in the exemplifications then? Is anything in these so-called exemplifications which is then legally binding if they're not the original, and if King John never signed it, if the barons never got together? I mean, are you saying that none of that actually happened and that somebody's just made that up to suit other purposes?
Yes.
Right.
Absolutely.
I'm glad we got that sorted out.
Yeah,
there we go.
Yeah, good. I think it was Pope Gregory the 14th. Pope Gregory's were the evil ones. So Pope Gregory the 9th and Pope Gregory the 14th. Pope Gregory the 9th wrote the Magna Carta, or had it written, in Frienisberg Abbey in 1234, which was 19 years after the Magna Carta, right? And then it was taken to Rome, and then the Earl of Arundel sent his secretary to Italy to pick up this document. And when this guy got the document, he wrote back and said, this is bigger than the Templars' shift. That's when the Templars gave all their assets to the Pope and then changed themselves into the Poor Knights of Christ, rode up to the Vatican and two men on a donkey and said, give us all of the land and assets of the Knights Templar. And the Pope said, yeah, sure, here it is.
Right.
That's what happened between 1314 and 1359. So they were saying that the Magna Carta was bigger, right? So it was first brought back to Britain, not England. England ended in 1603. Britain didn't start until 1707, right? So in between 1603 and 1707, we had this fictional country called Britain, B-R-I-T-T, extra T, A-I-N-E. So extra T and E on the end. Fictional country for 104 years, right? And that's when the Magna Carta was introduced into Britain, right? Not England. So King John never actually saw the Magna Carta in his lifetime. And on all copies of the Magna Carta, there's no King John seal. And they tried to put one on there, but they thought it's really bad. So they burnt it. So they melted the seal, right? And then there's no other baron seals. There's no papal seals or papal legate seals. There's no King John seals. There's no signatures at all. And they're all written in the same perfect monk's handwriting, all exactly the same, except one of them is in landscape and the rest are in portrait. And one of them came out of a tailor's shop in London. No one knows where it came from. And the other was delivered to Sir Robert Cotton, to the Cotton Library, supposedly, when Sir Robert Cotton was in prison for fraud. And when the guy delivering it, Sir Robert Daring, who was delivering this Magna Carta, the landscape copy, he was also a convicted fraudster, document fraudster. So you got one document fraudster delivering the Magna Carta to another document fraudster, both having been in prison for document fraud.
Very suspicious.
Yes, not a good.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating that there is no copy, there's no original sources to show that this copy existed. We only have these dubious exemplars of this. what's in those exemplars that is of use then to a population? What are they actually
Absolutely nothing.
stating?
Absolutely nothing. Nothing at all. Just nothing. It's like a nothing document with a fancy title. For a start, we should clear up. It was first called the Charter of Liberties from 1215, 1216 to February 1218. And then it started to be called the Magna Carta for no particular reason other than it sounded good, right?
The big charter.
So what's in the Magna Carta? It's basically this. The church shall be free. The church can collect tax instead of the king or the government. No clergy can be charged for anything. Clergy who have a church on like ducal grounds, where the dukes built him a church on the grounds, and he's got an area around it for sheep and cows and milk and self-sustaining. If that priest leaves, known as a bounder priest, he still collects the rents on that land for the next 60 years.
Right.
That's what it says in the Magna Carta. And no woman who's a witness to a murder is to be taken for any credibility unless it's her husband being murdered. As soon as the husband dies, the woman gets kicked out of the house in 40 days. It's very misogynistic, very church. You know? Yeah.
We
nothing, just nothing. Just nothing.
So many people place so much on this pivotal document.
Clause 61.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course many of the other clauses have been expunged, if that's the correct term, I don't know, but taken out. Yeah. And this clause 61, which people have hung their hats on or hung their reputations, and what have you. Can you remind us what that is about?
Clause 61 says that none of these clauses can be removed from the Magna Carta.
Right, even though they did remove the clauses.
They removed clause 61, then they removed all of the other clauses, mainly between around 1842, 1865 to 70 and 1969. They removed all except 3 clauses from the Magna Carta. And it was the Magna Carta was pretending to be the basis of common law, but what it was really was a Catholic Church overthrow of England.
Right.
Through lies.
Yes. Now that from the journey that I've been going on, I am in a situation where my world has turned upside down. The things I thought were true have proven to be untrue. So many, the kind benevolent government that you thought was looking after you turns out to be a tyrannical dictatorship.
Yeah.
And so many things that one thought was as reported, 9/11, moon landings, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
I'm in a position now where you could tell me almost anything that I thought was really solid, and I'm prepared to entertain the fact that it might not be. So I'm more than happy to explore the fact that the Magna Carta, which is this pivotal document. Now, I know there are plenty of people who will go, but this is rubbish. We've grown up with it. It's a pillar of our society. We couldn't possibly entertain it. And I guess in your work, you're saying, look, just bear with me 1 second, because your book is full of facts and research. How long has it taken you to disseminate this information and then try and put it into various books? As I say, there is 13 altogether. 4
years.
Right.
I wrote 13 books in 4 years. And they knew the powers that be run all of these catch and release agents on the media who pretend to be historians and knowledgeable and all this stuff, but they're actually criminals who have been charged and convicted but not sentenced, and they are charged with attacking anyone who's telling the truth. So while I was writing these 14 books, I had drug addicts, catch and release, who were doing interviews without me in it, saying, closing the book on Greg Hallett, although I was writing 13 books at the time. So most of the information we get on the internet is fake and false. And when you get well-researched information, they can't attack it because it's the same references that their academics are using. So they attack the author's person.
Right.
And so what they did is they ended up attacking my family, who, Prince Philip had previously attacked. So they were, heroin users. And I hadn't seen them in 4 decades. And then they pop up on the screen saying all this shit about me, showing photographs of not me.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
And then making up the story based on photographs of not me, having not seen them for 4 decades. So, that's the nastiness of the internet, and that's the nastiness of the government that doesn't want the truth told, that the government and actually the British royal family have no standing at all, because not only is the Magna Carta fake, the Charter of the Forest is fake, and the Bayeux Tapestry is fake, and the song of the Battle of Hastings is fake. The Battle of Hastings is fake, and King George VI of Scotland, who's supposed, or King James VI of Scotland, who's supposedly James I of England, no longer existed. So Britain, which was a fiction, he was actually a commoner. He had no royal blood at all. James VI, James I, he was known as James the Shit. So the whole Stuart lineage from 1603 to 1688 and their descendants, they're commoners, they have no standing. So I look at people like Charles and I go, that guy's got no royal blood at all. He's just a commoner. He's a usurper. He's actually from a long line of bastards. And I've documented all the bastardry all the way through, all the illegitimates. And from Queen Victoria, including Queen Victoria on, there's only one legitimate. And that was George VI, who was retarded. Well, almost retarded. He had 67 IQ, which is 1 IQ point above retarded. So,
So, this is really fascinating, because I think we're living in a time now where people are slowly beginning to suspect, even if they don't know the full picture of stuff, people are beginning to suspect that things aren't right and that certain things are not legitimate. And here you are in your smart jacket and lovely shirt, ready to pull the tablecloth, from the table, which people have lived up with history, and everybody knows, the Magna Carta, the big signing of this document, the kings and queens of England, and all of this. But we're in a position now where so much is being challenged, and I think this is a good thing. Now, I'm not saying I 100% fully understand everything that you've told me, or that I know for sure, because of course so much has been pulled over our eyes that one has to do one's own due diligence and think what is reasonable and explore things. But I know that when anybody suggests something which is challenging, people can very easily shut down and go, no, that can't possibly happen. And in a way, I feel what you're offering is just open your mind and see what you think, and then do your own research, which I guess is all you can do. But you've done a lot of it seems research in here.
Well, what I did is I didn't go out to tell a story. I went out to research the footnotes that were offered on the official history of the Magna Carta. And then I wrote the story line, which is like the intro and the page, entirely based on the research. And I didn't make up anything. I didn't have to do any leaps. I just literally wrote the story from the facts uncovered. And that was that Runnymede was a floodplain. The Magna Carta was previously called the Charter of Liberties, and there are no originals. There are no copies of the original. There are drafts. There are actually no drafts, and there are copies of drafts, which are exemplified copies of drafts, which are lots of swirly lettering and a little picture here and there. None of them have seals, and none of them have signatures. There's no evidence in the entire record of the British government, the UK government, the British Library, British Museum, the National Archives. There is no, and even in Scotland, there is no record of the Magna Carta existing in its lifetime. And even Shakespeare didn't mention it because it didn't exist. Right? When he wrote King John, he did not mention Shakespeare. Shakespeare didn't mention
the Magna Carta.
So what you've got is this giant fraud. And part of the test of kingship, if you're the true king of England, is you can come to this country and you can look up all of their records and write the true history and get rid of the frauds. That's part of kingship. And that's what I've done.
Right. So let us, it's not for me to question. I try not to sort of do a BBC, challenging you to, I just wanted you to be able to present the facts.
I wish they did.
Well, I'm sure well, as you say, they challenge your reputation, or they challenge you as a person rather than the facts. What does this mean? What does this now mean? If, let's say, people went, wow, okay, you're absolutely right, we believe you and we're on your side, and why not? But what would that mean to society and where we are? Because so much is underpinned on the fact that we have this one document that is supposed to hold, as you say, the common law, constitution and things like that together. And indeed, as you've also claimed, with the kingships and stuff. Where are we? Are we sort of up the creek without a paddle?
You are so far up the creek without a paddle and in a sinking ship.
It certainly feels like we're on a sinking ship, when you see how we're being treated by governments that seem to have more legitimacy than they really ought to have, something I've been banging on about in my monologues. But so what does this mean then?
I don't think the government has any legitimacy. That's why they have so many different names. They're called UK Govt, UK Parliament, Parliament of Great Britain, Parliament of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And they actually run Ireland as well, ERA. The ERA government is actually in Westminster.
Right.
So that's a fake thing that Ireland is separate. It's run from 10 Downing Street, essentially. What was the question again?
The question is, once you've pulled that,
where are you?
Where does it leave us? Let's just take, we'll say that you're right.
We thought we had common law.
Yes.
We thought we had common law comes from the Magna Carta, but what the Magna Carta actually gives us is church dictatorship, and no laws for the common man, no rules for the common man at all. The only people the Magna Carta was actually written for was the church and the 1% of people who inherited bucket loads of land from 1066, which was another fraud, another Catholic.
Yes.
So we had the Vinerian professor of common law, started in about 1753, and then at Oxford, and that immediately became the Vinerian professorship of English law by 1755, and the Vinerian professorship of English law was getting rid of common law as much as possible. And they held up the Magna Carta as common law for so long because it was a fake document with common laws that didn't apply to the common man. So it was entirely worthless. So that's why they're holding up the Magna Carta for so long. Right?
So where we are then, if we have a document that's really there for the church, what does that mean for the people of this land, whether we're in England? Are we still back in England now, or are we still in Britain?
No, England hasn't existed. I'm the King of England, right?
Right.
But England hasn't existed since 1603. And then it got terminated in 1707, right? And then 1708, you started to have the government of Great Britain. Great Britain was invented. Britain was never a thing, and Britain was illegal. So you kind of had no legal government from 1603 to 1708, right? Which is, huge. So the 1600s and 1700s, so from 1600 to 1800, it was 2 centuries of absolute frauds, just people lying through their teeth. And the bigger they lied, the more they got promoted. And the Catholics basically came over within James VI when he illegitimately took over England and called it Britain. And they just destroyed all the values of England and over a century, and then called it Britain and then Britain. So you actually got monarchs descending from monarchs who are kings of nothing, like James I, Charles I, Charles II, James II, Queen Anne. They were actually monarchs of nothing.
Yeah.
At least I'm the king of England that used to exist, but they were actually monarchs of nothing, right? And so what's happened to acknowledge that that we're the true monarchs of England is all of the European royal families gave us royal marks. So we've just got tons and tons and tons of royal marks. And I've published some of them in these here, these 5 books. There.
No, right.
There. So, more than 5 books there, right? So I've got 40 royal marks in there, but we've got like the true sword of the Duke of Saxon, Coburg, and Gotha. They don't. So they're crowning themselves with a fake sword and a fake crown and a fake orb and a fake scepter. And the crown of St. Edward's was stolen in 1216, along with the orb and the scepter. And then it was stolen again in 1450. And then it was destroyed around 1648 by Cromwell. And then it was stolen again in 1671. The crown was flattened and the scepter was sawed in half with a hacksaw and stuck down someone's trousers. Right. So when they say St. Edward's crown has been placed upon the head, it's not. It's a 4 times over fake. Right. And same with the orb, same with the scepter. And and we've got the true sword of the Duke of Saxon, Coburg, and Gotha. They don't. They've just got this fake.
Do they know that it's fake?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They've not, and they actually see all this stuff is prophesized. It's all predicted. So all the stuff was actually written up. So like when I was 5, Queen Elizabeth II sent her Sergeant Surgeon, Lord Arthur Espy Porritt, out to New Zealand to see me and introduce me to King George VI's son. No.
So why would they do that? I mean, so let's just explore then your lineage and how that all came about, because it sounds to me, and I haven't explored this myself with your books. You sent me a couple of books, but I haven't had a huge amount of time to read in great depth. So let's just explore your where are you from originally? You're a New Zealander?
Yeah.
But your family ancestry.
Originally from England. Yeah. So my grandfather was born in England.
So at what point did you start to suspect that you were in the lineage then to royalty?
I wrote this. I've got another one here. I've got what is it? Oh, I can't see it. Queen Anne Boleyn's Great Escape and Legacy, right?
Yeah.
So I found out that Queen Anne Boleyn was had escaped her execution, and that she was actually the grandmother of Sir Walter Raleigh, right? And then Sir Walter Raleigh was the great-grandfather of the Prince of Pirates, Black Sam Bellamy. They're both pirates and great sailors. Prince of Pirates, Black Sam Bellamy, was engaged to Maria Goody Hallett in Cape Cod, and she got pregnant to him. And then he got the biggest gold and rubies and emeralds and pirate haul in history. And then this storm came up and he sunk 500 yards off Wellfleet off Cape Cod. And that got uncovered in about 2002, and then did a 6-year tour around the United States. So that would have made us the wealthiest family in history, right? But the child survived as Henry Hallett, changing to on the ship, changing to John Hallett, and then he went to Bodiam Castle and then to Etchingham, and then to Rotherfield, and then to Brighton, where we were the mayors of Brighton 4 times, and we're credited with building East Brighton, and we worked with the Marquis of Bristol for 33 years with 150. We had 150 carpenters. That ties in, and then there's this typology theology where they leave repeating patterns in the landmarks. And then I was invited to be the royal historian for 4 years with Queen Victoria's great grandson, the royal primogeniture. So
they've deliberately kept you in the loop, as it were.
They kept me in the loop, and they briefed me, and then because I'm the King of England, also the King of New Zealand by other means, because Raleigh was actually given North America in 1584, 1586, and 1591, plus any newly discovered lands that weren't occupied by a Christian prince, which included New Zealand. So I'm also the owner of North America, the country and the continent, and the owner of New Zealand, right? So when I was in New Zealand, the Security Intelligence Service, which is like MI6, and Internal Affairs, which is like MI5, they were briefing me 4 to 6 times a week for 7 years. And they briefed me as the 2-term Governor General and interim Prime Minister. And I was invited to be an MP.
Wow.
So, I was just in the loop, and I've just, the stuff I publish is just a small section of the stuff I've got. It's just the stuff that I've managed to get into resolved. And the most difficult thing with 13 books is actually trying to get them in order.
Right. Yes. And also to get people to perhaps read them in order, because some like the Magna Carta Frauds will stand out as something that people go, oh, actually, I've heard of that. I'm interested in that. How can that possibly be true, etc.
Yeah.
Whereas perhaps others, which might be kings and queens, they go, oh, I'm not interested in kings and queens. What do they know, etc.
Well, it's interesting when they murder each other.
Well, yes. Everyone loves a good murder, don't they? So here's a question. So this is completely random and off the main topic, because it strikes me that if you are King John III of England, there will be a lot of people who will say, actually, you seem a lot more preferable than the one we've got, who seems to be keen on a lot of the things the WEF are doing. And all of that. And wouldn't it be nice to have a king who was actually on the people's side? So I'll ask you point blank, are you on the people's side?
Yeah, I'm on the people's side, yeah. And I think Prince Charles is absolutely behind creating WEF. And I think that the European Economic Community was an attempt, and becoming the European Union was an attempt by Queen Elizabeth, who was illegitimate, so she was compromised, to hand over the UK to the European Union, which is actually a front for the Catholic Church, right? And then as soon as Brexit stopped, the World Economic Forum came up straight away, like that. Brexit's over, now we've got WEF. Brexit's over, now we've got WEF, just like that. And that's Prince Charles pushing this this German guy, Klaus.
Yes. Yes.
Give me a minute.
Dr. Evil.
Doing everything that is against kingship and quite satanic, like putting Prince Philip's grandfather, Winston Churchill's head on a bulldog. That's actually what he signed for. And mixing species.
Right.
Mixing, right?
Yeah.
So, and Prince Charles is trying to give away the UK to the Catholic Church. He's actually a compromised Jesuit. He's catch and release. Charged, convicted, and not sentenced. And he'll do whatever the evil powers that be want. He's just an incredibly weak character. Just so weak. I think
people
5 foot people and a half, weighs about 10 stone. He's got sausage fingers with incredibly ugly fingers. And he's got yellow grey teeth, and when he smiles, everyone goes, they constantly show him getting out of the car and smiling, and they try and get the camera so it doesn't show his teeth too much. and to crowds that aren't there.
Hmm.
And on the coronations, you've got higher crowds, and no one's actually allowed into that area. No one was allowed in to the coronation area at all. It was all hired because he's so unpopular. And his wife's a bank robber.
Explain that one.
Well, the BBC during the coronation, they go, and we actually know nothing about Camilla Parker Bowles or her family. She was the centre of the Northern Bank robbery. Her ex-husband, Brigadier Andrew Henry Parker Bowles, ran it, and Camilla Parker Bowles' brother, Mark Shand, created Elephant Family to launder the money. And then Camilla Parker Bowles' ex-husband, Brigadier Andrew Henry Parker Bowles, his business partner, Ted Cunningham, after 5 years, got convicted of the money aspect of the Northern Bank robbery and had to pay back £3.03 million and was sentenced to 10 years, but he only got 5 years because Prince Charles came along and rewrote the Supreme Court rules of Ireland so that this guy would only do 5 years out of 10. And what Prince Charles wrote was completely nonsensical. It was basically saying the head of the police can't charge anyone for bank robbery, and if they do, that person's got to be set free. No sense, nothing.
No sense, absolutely.
And this is all off Wikipedia, right? So now the £26.5 million, which is the biggest bank robbery in UK history, Northern Bank robbery in 1920, December 2004, that money is now being laundered through Elephant Family, which was created by Camilla Parker Bowles' brother, Mark Shand. And that, what survived that 23.5 million is actually being used to fund counterintelligence and the alternative media.
Wow. So, a lot of claims there as well.
And he's not a Christian. And Charles is not a Christian. He's
no, and I think a lot of people will be fascinated by what you've just said there. Your books are they available now?
They're available to order if you just register your interest in info@kingof.uk. King of, yeah. .uk.
Okay, I'll put the link in the description.
Yeah. And then basically doing an interview. You're going to write the bit on the back. I'm going to quote you somewhere.
You're going to quote me.
And then it's going out to print this week.
Yeah, well, that'll be the first time I'm quoted, I guess. I wanted to. I mean, there's so many interesting bits in here which people will find. I mean, I think, it's people should just have a look at the books because I think it's such an outrageous claim, and I'm not saying that it's not true. It's just I think people need to be opening their eyes to so many things that we have been lied to by so many so-called elites people. That anything that makes people question that's going on at the moment, and then, as I said earlier, can do their own research and go, wow, is that right? Could that possibly be right? I think is a good thing, because we do just acquiesce left, right and centre, particularly when it comes to the government or indeed the royals. But there was one bit here that just made me smile when I read it, and also my girlfriend, the lovely Julia, she thought it was great. And although people may not think it means very much, you say here in your book on page 89 on the Magna Carta frauds, it says it was here in this impassable 33 acres and impassable 27 square miles of floodplains, marsh, bog and spring-fed wetlands that the Archbishop of Canterbury, Stephen Langton's Charter of Liberties and Magna Carta were purportedly signed and sealed with papal legate Pandulph, or how do you pronounce that? Ferrazio, present. But Runnymede lacked the dry ground for 1,000 men and horses to ride on or a place to sign. Runnymede had no lack of bats, beetles, cormorants, crickets, deer, dragonflies, ducks, little egret, geese, grasshoppers, grey heron, hoverflies, ladybirds, lapwing, moorhens, midges, mosquitoes, snipe flies, otters, swans, water rats, water shrew, water vole, and even wolves up to AD 1400, but none of these were mentioned by any chronicler, as no chronicler was present at any of the events they reported on. And I just think that's it's very funny, but also it just reminds you what a bog was like back in that era, and what it would have been like if you were all these people trying to sort of get through that field of dead horses, as you describe it. Yeah. So I love that. You no doubt challenge people with your books, and good for you to do that. It is interesting that, like so many people who are trying to get a certain point of view out, that the information isn't the thing that's criticised; it's the person that is criticised, because they can't get that. And we've seen that in so many different areas, particularly in the woke area. Is, if you don't have our opinion, you're just an idiot. Full stop. And it's like, well, that's not a legitimate argument, is it? I might be an idiot, but I am entitled to my opinion. But they won't let you do that. Thank you so much.
I've had plenty of attacks, and as soon as I get something right, and people can take that information down to the pub and say it, that's how I like to write. So you can take the snippet down to the pub, and as soon as they check the references and realize that it's true, it's referenced correctly, etc., then they attack me, the person. And they've been doing that now for the last 3 years. So in 2020, I got really famous for about 2 weeks, and then no. And it was like the fastest bell curve in history. A bell curve is like that, right?
Yeah.
Mine was like this.
Is it?
know.
Well, we know as you get to the truth, people sort of shut you down as quickly as possible. And I'm thinking of all the history books that I've got on my shelf, and many people who read history and what have you. And you take an eminent historian and you assume that they are presenting the truth, and maybe they honestly believe that what they're presenting is the truth. But and I've been very questionable about those that are what do they call it, revisionists on history. I'm changing my mind about that. You said some interesting things about Churchill before.
It's actually taught. If you get a Churchill scholarship and you go to the Churchill College and you study everything about Churchill, one of the things they tell you is that Churchill employed 13 authors to write each volume and agreed to have it credited to Churchill. So Churchill put out 13 volumes, I've put out 13 volumes. And Churchill didn't write any of it, none. He was an alcoholic and sociopath, psychopath, a liar, and he's actually Queen Elizabeth II's biological father, and Princess Margaret's biological father. And that I can actually trace that back to what's her name? What's the Queen Mother's name? Elizabeth Bowes Lyon. Yeah. To signify that, they created Bowes Lyon's ice cream in Kensington in 1925 to show that the first child had died of epilepsy, and the second children, which was Elizabeth and Margaret, had been George VI had been replaced with a surrogate, and that was Edward VII's son, illegitimate son, Winston Churchill. And even Oxford University and Cambridge teach that Winston Churchill was the illegitimate son of Edward VII. And Edward VII used to take Churchill out to dinner when he was 14, show him around the town.
One of the questions I often get asked, and we saw that during the coronation, there was a lot of questions about the oath and all of that. And we saw that. I'd be interested, just as a matter of interest, really, on your opinion on this. We explored the coronation of 1953 and the signing of the oath, in which we saw Queen Elizabeth, or at least we saw Elizabeth, sign on the top of the oath, which there was a lot of debate about whether that was protocol or correct, because in a contract you always sign at the bottom, because anything underneath that would have been signed after a signature, and you could prove that. Signing on the top allegedly said that the oath was null and void because she'd signed in the wrong place.
I actually revealed this in 2016 and had pictures of it and did videos on it and stuff. And it largely got ignored because it was true. So what the catch and release people do in the media is they get my stuff years later and reproduce it as though it's their idea and not mine.
Oh, right.
So going back to my research on it, she had signed on the top, right, which means that everything below is null and void. And then she'd underlined it all the way across. And then the copy was she'd underlined it only part way across.
Partially, yeah.
So they were two different documents. Yeah. And she also signed her Z, in her various signatures as a J and as a G and as an S, which was codifying Joseph Gregory sovereign, because she always knew I was the King of England, right? So if you look at her signatures, that's what it's really about.
So what about the coronation we've just had? There seemed to be two bits of paper that Charles was signing.
Well, he's only king for 3 days, and then it goes to the chair of the state. But he's actually signing to be the king of. This is my understanding of it. I actually watched Dinner with Schmucks instead of the ceremony, so I did. And then the one in Scotland, I watched Copy Kings. It's quite a good movie too. So he's signing one for supposedly king of the UK, but it's actually of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, king, suffix, right? And when you got a suffix name like get called, Vobes, Richard, come here, we got a traffic ticket, it's reversed.
Yeah.
Right? So when you got of king at the end, right, of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, king, suffix, king, that means you're either delinquent or illegitimate. Delinquent means you're bankrupt or you're illegitimate. And he comes from 440 years of illegitimacy from James VI on, right? Where most of the monarchs were illegitimate, and a lot of the monarchs' partners were illegitimate as well. So that's why he's a suffix king of a corporate entity. Oh, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland is a corporate entity.
Yes.
And the United Kingdom of Great Britain was actually created on a gambling debt, right? So we got this what became the Great British Empire was actually based on a gambling debt.
Yeah, you couldn't make it up, could you? Although they did.
So I'm king of England, right? And I'm king of the land and the people. And Charles is not king of the land or the people. He's king of all the corporate stuff, which is the city of London and the ports and the 5 sink ports. And he's no royal blood, and he's not a king. He's not defining the boundaries and protecting it. He's a globalist. He's trying to give away the UK to the rest of the world. And I'm trying to say England is England for the English, and we have a culture, and we are English, and this is what we do. We have cups of tea and dress like you, Richard.
Absolutely. So my final question, as we draw this to an end, do you think that we are seeing the end of that establishment thing, the end of the royals and the end of the government? Are we seeing that crumble now?
In 1987, when all the blue chip companies collapsed, so these were guaranteed companies, and they just collapsed. So We're looking at the British royal family as a blue chip royal family, and we're just witnessing it collapse. It is a nothing. It's a nothing. It's no royal blood. They don't have the royal objects. And they don't do things for England or the UK. They're globalists, and they're trying to give away England and the UK to the Catholic Church and the Jesuits. And the mark of the Jesuits is no values. They're trying to take over the world with no values. Prince Charles has no values. He's trying to stick his grandfather Winston Churchill's head on a bulldog, as per the dog. So he's got no values, and he's all pro anything except white heterosexual male.
Yeah.
So he's got no values, and he's anti-Christian. At least Christianity had some sort of values. He hasn't got any of those. He's got no values, and his wife's a bank robber, and he covered up the bank robbery. And it's actually written up on Wikipedia. The Northern Bank robbery is written up on Wikipedia And none of the alternative media bother to read it because they're all blah, 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 having an opinion, attacking someone telling the truth. So they always ignore the truth. So there it is on Wikipedia under the Northern Bank robbery. And if you read it in order, get the footnotes out and study it, you can see that Camilla Parker Bowles organized the Northern Bank robbery. And then 111 days later, she married Prince Charles, right, knowing that he would cover it up.
Well, you've certainly challenged a lot of the audience, which is great. A lot of the audience, I think, however, will also be on your side on some of those the globalist opinions, because we've been seeing that unfold. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I'll leave a link in the description where people can get your books, which will be coming out soon.
I've still got on eBooks as well at King John III, all written out, kingjohn3rd.uk.
Is that all in words?
Yeah,
and no numbers?
yeah, all in words.
King John III.
Kingjohn3rd.uk and info at kingof.uk. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, Greg, thank you so much for sharing all that knowledge. It's
Hopefully do it again.
Yeah, we must. So there we are, ladies and gentlemen. What did you make of that? I imagine that at the start you're going, oh no, I can't, this is ridiculous. But hopefully as it's unfolded, it's whetted your appetite to find out more, which I think is always good. My thanks to Greg for coming on the show. I'll be back with more monologues and interviews. But until then, from Greg and I, thanks for watching, or should I say from King John III of England and I, thanks for watching and goodbye.